Hello, everyone. Welcome. I think we'll start this session on Corita Kent, and in particular, the celebration of the second edition of Someday Is Now. The book is there, right behind Andrea. We have two of the book's contributors here, the fantastic artist Andrea Bowers and the great designer Juliette Bellocq. Welcome. My name is Ian Berry. I'm the director of the Tang Museum, which is at Skidmore College in Saratoga Springs, New York. And 13 years ago, we organized a very ambitious survey of Corita Kent's work, which traveled to 5 museums and was the catalyst for making this book. The exhibition, and so what we've pulled together, what the images that are going to go by, soon they will, this is Andrea's show at the Tang.
Yeah, it was a collaboration with Olga Komandoris called Transformer.
And I wanted to show that to kind of get us talking a little bit as we go about the influence of Corita and the possibilities for Corita's work now and what we do with that and how we are inspired by that, in particular at the Tang Museum as a teaching museum on a college campus, but how it can inspire across all different ways. And I think Andrea and Juliette both have really good examples of how that has, you remember these? Isn't this amazing to see
Yeah, I'm
these?
just trying to see if I have all of them. I'm like, I've never seen that one before. I'm like, I don't think it's cool to see.
And this is Jeffrey Gibson, an artist looking and teaching with the collection of Corita Kent that we have at the museum. And so the slideshow starts, this beginning of the slideshow, we're just going to let it run while we talk, are several images of the book. The book is 256 pages. It is a comprehensive survey of Corita's work from early prints that are more illustrative through her kind of very sort of most often reproduced 60s experimental work made, many of them made right here in LA at Immaculate Heart. And then her work in the 70s and 80s made at Harry Hambly Studios, very near to here in Santa Clara. And so the book brings all of those works together alongside an oral history of some of Corita's closest friends and teachers and students at Immaculate Heart. Sasha Carrera, who at the time was the director of the Corita Art Center, embarked on a really great oral history, and this book has that oral history. And it also has the words of a long list of fantastic contemporary artists. And we compiled that list to be very East Coast and West Coast. So the East Coasters in the book are Deb Cass and Jim Hodges, Carrie Moyer, Sheila Pepe, Jason Simon, and there's a lot of West Coasters, Karen Carson, Roy Dowell, Larry Pittman, Steve Hurd, Pay White, Jim Iserman.
Mike Kelly.
Mike Kelly, we got Mike Kelly in there. And that was very much a conscious decision when we were making and editing the book to kind of spread the Corita love around and include the people that had been really core to promoting and exhibiting her work, like Julie Alt and Lorraine Wild, and others who had been really teaching and talking about Corita quite a bit. And then adding in a lot of artists who had grown up either with the work or had seen the work and it had affected their work, and Mike Kelly's a really good example of that. I want to, in particular, note Michael Duncan, who's not here, he couldn't be with us today, but Michael was my co-curator and co-editor of this book, And Michael himself was a collector, is a collector of Corita prints, and actually instigated the project. He had organized a smaller Corita show with contemporary art here in LA, which I didn't see, but I had been visiting with Michael and staying at his place when I came to LA and seeing Coritas around their house. And then I would go do a studio visit with Larry and Roy, and they had Coritas in their house. And then I'd go visit Jim Hodges in New York, and he had Coritas in his house. And then the story just started sort of spiraling out for me. So for me, my relationship to Corita started from artists. I didn't grow up with it. I didn't grow up in church. I didn't have family members that had them. It started really from artists who were inspired. And then the fuller picture and the bigger story came through the research of doing this book. But I would love for you both to say a little bit about your Corita origin stories and when you first found out about her and how that came into your life.
I can. Can you hear me? Yeah. So my name is Juliette. I'm a graphic designer. I lived in France for a big part of my life and then came to the United States for education, finishing my education at CalArts. And it was 1999, and Julie Alt had put a show at the Hammer Museum, and my art history teacher, Lauren Wild, said we should really go check it out. And before we would go, Julie, who was teaching at CalArts, was going to come show us some slides. Julie was not available that day. She handed all the slides. I don't know if you know what slides are anymore, but to Martin, her boyfriend at the time. Martin ran to the classroom and just went through those images, and I had never seen her work. And this was a time where I was trying to make sense of what graphic design was as a language. I was learning English. I was still processing my Frenchitude. And I can tell you that the zone in my brain where language is was just pulsing like crazy. And when I saw those slides for the first time, I did not fully understand it all, but it was very sensorial. I just, and I bet this happened to some of you in the room, I just sensorially totally fell in love with that work, meaning heartbeat, cheeks red, shaking, wet palm, that kind of reaction. And I think it took me a second to understand why this was happening, but this was the first time I comprehended that you could use design as a way to coalesce people towards causes that need bigger groups than just yourself to tackle. That it was the first time I could understand that someone had done the work, had found techniques to create a we towards something that I cared about. So it was presented as a language. I was super into learning languages at that time. So that was kind of my first moment with her. How about you, Andrea?
I can't remember. I feel like I've lived with her my whole life. But I know that CalArts, when I came to CalArts in 1990, and I am a major thrifter and vintage shopper and estate sailor. So almost all of the Coritas that I own, except for one, come from that because Immaculate Heart was here in Los Angeles. I have found them all over California. And that it's just a thing, her work is just so embedded here and beautiful in that way. But I think there's three aspects, like I think about this book, and there's three aspects to Corita's work that have, for a lifetime, been a constant influence and evaluation. Like I evaluate my own kind of belief system off of her work. One is aesthetics, and I don't think I'll ever reach Corita's level of aesthetic. I think it's phenomenal. You know, like, I don't think there's anything like it. Second of all, it was her commitment. I was really at first interested in the earlier work. It was her commitment to social justice and also, you know, anti-war movement. I think the work is more important now than it's been in a really long time. I think it's really, really powerful. And also her relationship, I guess there's 4 aspects. I have spent my life trying to figure out how to connect art and activism, and particularly social engagement. So community organizing, political activism. And honestly, for 9 years, I taught helped develop a pedagogy with Suzanne Lacey called New Genres Public Practice, which is socially engaged practice. And if you look at Corita's work teaching, she is one of the early founders of social practice, and no one has really written about her in those terms. That needs to be written about. I learned so much from her community organizing skills, and that also combines with a kind of like leftist liberal commitment to nonviolent civil disobedience. And the last aspect that I think maybe now more than ever I'm now 61, is the relationship to spirituality in your own practice. And I think when I was writing in here, I would consider myself an atheist. I no longer consider myself an atheist. And that sort of came through. I do not consider myself a Christian either. So it came through, you know, there's no way to get around the fact that she was a nun, right? Like, that was a rub for me, always a rub, right? Being someone who's pro-abortion, that was a huge rub. And like, wanting equal rights for women and hating patriarchy, I mean, let's face it, the church is the center of all of this stuff. And she, in 1968, she took a sabbatical and left the church. She was friends with the Berrigans. I think this history of political activism is so important. So I was trying to deal with this spirituality, and my mom was kind of a big influence because she was part of a women's group. They danced. They were crazy. They were like witches and Catholics, you know, and they were fighting nuclear power because she was in San Luis Obispo, and there's a nuclear power plant on a fault up there. And there was a group called Mothers for Peace. And I thought my mother was crazy, but actually she was amazing. And she was part of a movement, very tiny, nobody knows of, called Magical Politics. And it was very diverse spiritual and religious beliefs of feminists coming and activists coming together to fight nuclear energy. The Berrigans were that, and they were also fighting war. And they did that very famous, protest.
Which is why Corita went to Boston.
Yeah.
Because there was a community around Harvard of radical priests and professors who were
Plowshares.
Yeah. They were teaching this.
Yeah.
I just want to mention that some of these images that are going past now are some of the ways that what Andrea's talking about make themselves evident through Corita's teachings. Mm-hmm. She had a great curriculum. She had fantastic prompts. Sometimes they were a sentence. Sometimes they were a multi-page course assignment. They were incredibly inspiring. And so what you're seeing are images of how we continue to use her assignments at the Tang Museum with Skidmore students every year to do different projects where they're going out and learning how to see, or bringing images back, or talking about things that matter to them, or using printmaking to talk about issues.
Found objects, cardboard, like marches, signs, not necessarily.
And then these images, just to build a little bit on that, are from an exhibition that Andrea did in community with lots of collaborators, in particular really delving into the local community of Saratoga Springs and finding organizations that had issues, ideas, missions, visions that matched, and that the museum could be a place, could be sort of turned over to these groups to use. And what you're seeing are basically the ground, the stage, the home base that the artists created for then to be activated by a community, which was super, super successful.
One thing that's continued in my practice is that very early on, Olga and I were experimenting with trying to get institutions and educational departments of institutions to like maybe change the way they think or get more experimental and work with activist groups or community-based groups. And how do you do that? Because you're, as an artist, only there for like 3 months to a year, if you're lucky,
And
right?
something that's really interesting about Corita is that she was an artist, but she was a teacher. So she was within the institution, and she was developing this pedagogical concept and plan for her own audience, which were these young American women that were going to go into a world that was at war, that was at civic unrest, you know, that was going through immense difficulties.
All women, right?
All women, yeah. I think it opened up later, but at the time when she was really doing all this experimentation. And an amazing example of how she was addressing her own audience in looking at these young women is Mary's Day. You know, she decided that something that was taken on by the college, celebrating Mary during the month of May, became a whole engagement towards understanding as a young woman, how can I find my place into this tortured world? And there's a whole kind of educational work that the nuns were doing to teach the difficulties of going through complex thoughts about these political issues. And then they were doing artistic moves to kind of bring a whole community together. And then they were doing acts of service. So this was a pedagogy that was about engaging at all time. And so it's so nice to see these images.
Do you all think that, I mean, I always thought that she was trying to push the church in a more progressive direction.
Absolutely.
And it ultimately didn't end well, perhaps.
Yeah, it was not welcomed.
Well,
It's not
it's not
welcomed.
over. Yeah, exactly. That fight has not.
But I mean, that's really courageous, I think.
I'm wondering if she would think that the church was moving in a better direction, but that the Los Angeles diocese was putting the brake on everything, you know, that the church was doing at the time. So I think there was a moment in which she felt that the church was going faster than the diocese, you know. and
Perhaps
that-
it's different now, or perhaps we're just in an even more conservative fascist time.
Well,
But, you know, Trump
Yeah.
is, I always think about her now that Trump is fighting with the first American Pope, right? I find it quite fascinating in what Corita would think about that.
yeah, for sure. I would like to know.
I want to say, I would love to, we'll open up and have some conversation with you, I hope, in just a minute. And some of the things we're talking about now might be great to continue talking about. Before we get to that, I just want to say a little bit about design and production of the book, since we're at the art book fair. And thank Mary DelMonico, who is here, our partner in publishing this book, and critical to getting the second edition out. Long loved second edition, so thank you, Mary. Mary makes many books. We have made dozens of books together, and this is one of our favorites. The designer of this book is Barbara Glauber, who is a graphic designer in New York, who, like Lorraine and others, was very influenced in LA, seeing Corita's work and kind of using those design inspirations in her own work as mostly a book designer and a teacher. And Tony Manzella, I want to make a shout out. He was here yesterday speaking. He's the genius color separator of Los Angeles, and he worked on all the images. So we thank all of the excuse me, the team that made this book. Yes,
What made
please.
you decide to do a second edition?
Desire, great desire. You know, right? I mean, we hear, we hear, it's out of print, and people use it as a reference. And I think there really needs to be a reference on Corita out there. And this is the closest thing. We have we don't really know exactly how many prints she made, but there's at least a third of all her prints are in this book, and there are a quarter of all her prints were in the exhibition. So these were sort of big efforts to kind of, and the book really, the effort there is to tell a story, to be like a source book. So there's a lot of facts, there's a lot of dates, there's a lot of pictures. It's chronological, so you can get a sense of her as an artist, and you can get a sense of her stages when she's, cutting the screens herself with scissors at Immaculate Heart, when she's then sending them off to Harry Hambley to make the screens. You can kind of see that progression in the book, which as a curator and an art historian, I'm very interested in seeing those intricacies. But you can also see, when you get a lot of them and you can read them, we also transcribed, there's a part, sometimes it's really hard to read her writing. She wasn't great. And when they are turned into silkscreen and inked up, you can't even, it's really hard to read. So in the back of our book are transcriptions of all the words. So you can see, and there's footnoted, so you can see which is a Jim Morrison lyric, which is a Bible quote, which is a poem, which is where it all comes from. And you can read that, okay, one print has a mashup of, an insurance ad, Beatles lyric, her friend's poetry, and a Bible verse. And there are usually those combos, and particularly in the 60s work, those combos are on almost all the prints. Mm-hmm. And so I really wanted to have a source book out there for people to, one, know about the work, but then be able to reference it. So it's a reference book, and that should always be in print.
Awesome.
Right? Yeah. But design-wise, can you say a little bit more about what you're doing,
Sure.
and how, because I think it's very fitting with what we're talking about.
So after CalArts, after discovering Corita, it dawned on me that in California there was a matriarchy of design people, and I had never seen that in France. And discovering that work is really what oriented me towards teaching. So I became a graphic designer, and I taught for many years, and that's been a big part of my practice. And now I'm a graphic designer in an architectural firm, and our little graphic design studio takes on projects with the architects, and these architects only work on public and civic projects. We design spaces for people experiencing homelessness. We try to think about how can design add up to really enriching the communal space. And so this is really a place where you need a Corita in your life as a North Star. And one of the exercises that we do when we onboard people is to ask them about their pantheon. Who are you? Who fills your cup? And I have to say that Corita is top of my pantheon. She's someone that is that keeps on teaching. I don't know how many of you got a chance to go to the Corita Art Center, but I'm so glad to see some nodding. It's really important that you do. If you love a woman, if you like Los Angeles, if you think of ceremony as an act of resistance, then you should definitely visit the Corita Art Center. And I'm bringing it up because this is a place where you can see this aspect that is so important to me of Corita laying down techniques to engage into this world. If you're kind of going through your phone and you're going onto the New York Times or wherever you go and you get a little defeated, you show up in that space and you will learn some techniques on how to engage with the world as it is, meet the world where it's at, and by design, keep some faith and hope and room for the we, you know, that she was very good at transforming. There's actually an amazing show right now called Unordinary Days, Celebration as Resistance, and
By
it's
Olivier,
definitely
right
by
here.
Olivier Shaw,
Curator
who
of
is,
the Corita Art
you
Center.
know, I keep
right
looking
here.
that way because I'm just so inspired by Olivier. She's the curator, and she has been doing an amazing job connecting Corita to what we need today, you know.
Did you have any of that, of her, some of her last watercolors or later
Yes.
works in the
Yes,
show?
absolutely. They're coming around. We're coming around the corner, and the images to that. When Corita lived in Boston, she was fighting cancer at 2 different points, and during some of her time during her cancer treatments, she would go to the beach and do watercolors. And there are hundreds and hundreds of these fantastic watercolors, some of which I presume you can see at the Corita Art Center. And we had a whole room full. This is some of the later work. This is around that same time. These are the later prints. I don't think you can see the
She kind of
watercolors.
did, tell me if I'm wrong, some like watercolory kind of silk screens in a way.
like this.
And yeah, and
Like these.
pastel colors, and like also really focused more on like the content shifted, like maybe more about love and landscape and yeah.
Absolutely. And I do want these images to stick in your head of. So this is a Mary's Day project that continues on all around the world. People making sort of using cardboard boxes, using found materials, using donated materials to make signs, to make costumes, to make things for parades. So even if you don't have, silkscreen shop, you are enlisted and encouraged to make things. And I think that example is where it's all at.
Yep.
So, some questions and some thoughts from all of you. You are welcome. Please.
I just wanted to make a comment connected to your comment on, that's important, I suppose. You said that you were no longer an atheist, and I wrote something quickly about that, because her work starts in this devotional space, and then because of the misogyny of the archdiocese, she radicalizes her devotion into the human space and a little bit further away from the institutional notions of devotional work that would be made by people of the cloth. And I found that to be my same sort of journey. It's like, I think she made it basically impossible for me to be an atheist, because atheists are sort of connected to a faithless kind of existence, and I have been offered a view into that faithful existence, and I'm like, I'm not sure what I'm faithful about, except for maybe each other, but this is a really interesting journey of ours, I suppose, maybe some others too, but I find it ironic that it's the misogyny of the church itself that radicalizes her devotional work into the space of social action and activism and love for humans,
And this might be like the greatest power of her life and work, but I don't know if anybody's written about that yet, because I think it's it's always tiptoed around or something. I don't know. Like, I don't know. I could be wrong. You know way more than I do. Yeah. Or like the transitions has. Yeah, I think it's a fact. I mean, she's not alive, but and also I think near the end of her life, the kind of devotion to the landscape, you know. And when I was younger, I was confounded by these shifts. And now that I get older, it's making more sense to me, you know. So, anyway, yeah. So you said it so much more articulate than I did. Thank you.
Other questions? Yeah, please. There were some other hands back there. Yeah.
Hi. Thanks so much for speaking about this and presenting about the book. I'm sorry to swerve this part of the conversation more to like our historical context, but just thinking about her as a pop artist and where that fits in the context of like pop art in the 60s, or even found language and appropriated language within an art context, is something I wouldn't think of scripture in something that artists were appropriating in pop art or language art, but it definitely comes into play here. What would be more pop than like the Bible or something, but just in terms of Wonder Bread and stuff like that, and definitely feeling a spirit of pop that I associate with it.
Absolutely, 100%. You're right on, and she was right in there with. She was not an outsider. You know, she was completely in with what was happening in the world, and L.A. had a lot of pop artists from the East Coast came to LA. LA had its own pop scene. Galleries were showing that work. She saw that work. And her work, in many ways, I think, is leading a lot of that moment.
In
like
that Wonder Bread piece, there's a text about feeding the world, right?
Mhm.
There's a quote in the little dots about feeding the world.
Yes.
So it's as if it's pushing the ethics of what mass production should do and what artists should do who are sampling this stuff. And I'm wondering, from your question, if you can think of any pop artists who had a politic
Right.
like she did, you know, that was very clear. Or
Not as
in
clear.
art
I would
history.
say not as clear necessarily, but I think, I mean, the best of that moment of artists, who they were all turning something found to a different way of
Right.
communicating and
Right.
communicating something about their life, about gender, about race, about civil rights, about whatever was happening. I think it didn't always have a direction or an exclamation in the same way that Corita often had. But Corita was mysterious too in some of those quotes. You know, gee, let me jump into your game. Jim Morrison, you know, that's about,
Yeah.
you know, that's not about all kinds of games, you know. And so she's turning like these.
Make the meatballs
I
sing.
make the meatballs sing, you know, a classic. You know, I love how I think she's a sly,
The
you know,
tomato quote.
yeah, the juiciest tomato. And
On view at the Corita Art Center, extremely rare print. Don't miss it.
and I
Yeah.
think that, so I guess that I think I wouldn't say that she was the only one. I think you can find all kinds of really interesting ways to read what Warhol was doing with his
Warhol,
work.
I
you
think,
know,
for sure.
and lots of others. But the idea that she was right alongside a generation of artists who were looking to appropriate and then transform and say something else, she was right in there with her.
There's no way to not say she wasn't, and yet I'm no art historian. There's something in me that really rubs me the wrong way with that, because when I look at the pop prints and I see these women crying, oh, little cartoon, when I see this reproduction of goods, consumerism, you know, she, yes, was doing some of the same thing, but with so much substance. She was not selling the pop heart. You know, she was selling the fact, she was a nun. She did not own things, you know? And so when you go one step beyond this, and you're thinking about women as the forces of a community that are actually changing the world, it's very different than looking at a Roy Lichtenstein crying lady with perfect hair. And when you're looking at a can of tomato soup that is supposed to remind you when you're at the grocery store that the divine and the earthy are a back and forth movement, and that you should remember that everything that is ordinary is also sacred, that to me goes a little bit beyond the fact that I can find another tomato soup. So there's something about the techniques that are so unmistakable, but it makes me want to roar. You know, she made other points that are really substantial.
I'm thinking, well, actually, what if you go the other way and you say it's just really coming out of poetry and concrete poetry and the Russian and the development of typography and Swiss Dada word, you know, everything that ever used typography as that the word becomes, okay, so we're going to go biblical. The word becomes flesh, that the word becomes concrete. And, you know, there's so much about the word. Okay, my father is an Episcopal priest, so so I can quote a lot of
That
scripture.
makes a lot of sense to me.
And
Yeah.
there's a lot of use of the word word in there.
Exactly, and in religion, in her religion at that time, there is this love of language, and art major had to minor in English to be able to have their degree in her, you know, in her department. But there's also that this was a time where the word bread did not mean anything anymore. The word God was broken and didn't mean anything. You know, there were so many changes. So what does happen when you take those words and smash them, crack them open, and try to witness what's really in them? You know, rebuild meaning. How do you rebuild what capsule words used to carry, and we've lost that faith that those words still carry meaning. So there's this kind of action of undoing language until we're sure that we're really rebuilding something that makes sense. And I think she was in the business of making sense.
And
at
I'll
a
say,
time where it
just to kind of put add another edge to influences and art and what she's looking at, we have lots, in the archives, there's lots of connections to people like Saul Bass, Alfred Hitchcock, Buckminster Fuller, John Cage, Charles Eames.
Oh, man.
She did call it.
That's the one thing that
it
always
was
frustrated me, was her visiting
what was her
artists
list?
were almost all men.
They were all
but
men.
that's probably all there were at the time.
Well, she could have invited Ray Eames too.
Yeah, exactly.
But, well, the point being that she was flooding herself with interesting influences from, and then she also kept a great collection at Immaculate Heart of flea market finds and folk art and, you know, Life magazines and all different kinds of things. She was flooding herself with ideas, with inspiration. And the people that she was circling around were people who were big thinkers, who were saying the kinds of things that Juliette is saying. And that, I think that stew is very unique.
There's an anecdote I learned about not that long ago where she received a copy of The Medium is the Message. She gets totally ignited and electrified by that book. And she writes to the publisher and she's like, send me the books for the students. And the books do not arrive on time. So she cuts apart her own copy and she pastes it page by page in the corridor. And at the end of class, she's like, you gotta read this book. This is interesting for those reasons. the teacher in her. Oh, and by the way, it's in the corridor. Like, you know, the kind of feeling that you get when you meet the information that you need to make sense out of your own world. It's both her art, it's both her making, it's also her teaching. I mean, she would have probably loved the book fair, that's for sure.
Yes.
There's one
Good.
other direction that's really interesting for Los Angeles. I mean, you all talk about this at the Corita Center. Did Sister Karen know Sister Corita?
Yes, she was a student.
She was a student, and so that formed self-help graphics.
Yeah.
You know, Sister Karen formed self-help graphics, which is one of my favorite places on the earth. And so, like, I mean, ultimately, too, I think it was like this, I mean, utopic model, which when I first found Corita's work, I thought was just inherently what an artist did.
Yeah.
But now we're at a time where most artists don't think like that anymore. And
No, self-help
Yeah.
is, are they set up here? At
Yes.
do they have a booth
They have
here?
a booth here?
Oh, maybe not.
Self-help is fantastic. If you don't know about it, you should visit. They're a tremendous organization which prints with dozens of artists every year.
They teach. They
And-
have graphic
and
facilities.
in a way is, in addition to the Corita Art Center, one of the most visible ways you can sort of see the legacy of Corita here in LA.
I think founded during the uprising, like the Brown Berets here
During the
in Los
Chicano movement,
Angeles. Yeah.
and the student walkouts.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I wanted to throw a thought in along with this notion of pop. I've always thought of Corita's journey outside of any comparison when it comes to language, but with form and color, very similar to that of Mondrian, because Mondrian's early landscapes, Mondrian's sort of color palette is really layered and dark, and and then all of a sudden he merges with a completely different view of what landscapes could be, in the same way that her early works are devotional, layered, thick, browns, greens, dark colors. And then as soon as the fire happens, in that sense, the spirit is ignited, she finds her way to a palette. And I'm not talking about content or words, I'm just talking about palettes and simplicity, that Mondrian's neoplasticism is an allegorical sort of idea around pop, that is before pop could possibly exist, but also to take pop and just say it's a notion, it's an idea, not necessarily a movement, and that she situates her future in a limited color palette with a series of forms that feels quite similar to the reduction that happens with Mondrian.
It's a nice note about color. I will say that making this book, why you all need to get a copy at the DelMonico booth, 20% off, free shipping, is that we used fluorescent ink on 5 of the signatures in the book. She used fluorescent ink from time to time in her prints. It's impossible to reproduce if you don't use the actual fluorescent ink in the printing of the book. So we weren't able to do it. We weren't able to do it on every page and every work, but it was one of our goals to try to get those colors and try to get as close as we could to that. Mary. Oh yeah, last page. Last page to end our session here. Let's open to the last page.
Hold on, let me move my book.
There it is. And this is one of Corita's classic teaching methods, was to take an empty 35 millimeter slide and give those out to her students, and they would walk around wherever she would take them, the grocery store, the car dealership, walking down the street, and see and look at the world, and then bring that back and inspire their own art making.
And I'm imagining that it is definitely an art teacher technique to help you see more, but I'm also imagining that when the world is really hard, it's also a technique to only take a little bit at a time and commit to staying awake, to commit to stay in the world and not just follow that kind of, sometimes we just want to withdraw. And I think of the entire work of Corita as a technique to remain in the present moment, even when it's hard. I think we have a question.
There's one other question. There's kind of two. I don't have the two.
Mine's just quick. In terms of places that are making protest art, I work at the Metabolic Studio in
We
Los
love
Angeles.
the Metabolic Studio.
So
Lauren
every
Vaughn.
first Monday of every month, we are open to the public. You just please RSVP so we don't. know how many
Metabolic
people are
Studio is
coming.
one of LA's greatest gifts, and everyone should try to visit. There's like bending the water. It's all amazing.
Thank you. Yeah. So anyway, we have a wide selection of prints made by artists that are available to print paper or T-shirts or whatever. And if you want a flyer for the studio.
Thank you so much.
Last one.
Oh, I just want to say hi, Andrea.
Hi.
I'm a former student.
Yeah,
of
I know.
Andrea,
Hi.
So it's so nice to see her.
I'm back teaching again. I'm at UCLA all of a sudden.
Oh yeah. But I just want to say, like, this talk is so great, and I think it's really refreshing to see like a coverage of Corita Kent's work, but in relation to Andrea's work,
Oh,
right, and
thank
how
you.
important it is in terms of art historically, in terms of the relation to content, and also like feminism and activism, especially within this current political climate, right? But I currently teach now as well, and I was really curious about the assignment prompts that you mentioned. Are they in the book?
Yes, there's a whole section of assignments. So, all for you, all for the taking.
Also videos too. There's great videos. There's been a ton of interviews with the Corita Center. Like, there's a lot of info online.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
I'm going to do one more thing that I tend to do more now than ever. I just want to say, not only visiting the Corita Center, it's important that we keep the Corita Center open. So it's really important that we all donate, no matter how small. It's important that we support the Corita Center. And also, I'm just going to throw in one more, the Feminist Center for Creative Work, which has
Yes.
benefit coming up. So look online, you can look on my Instagram. But these groups we need to support. There's a lot of crossover, and they're really important.
And they all need to exist together.
They all need to exist together, because they're the ones that, times are really hard economically. They're the most at risk right now, so we need to support these groups.
Thank you.
Thank you. So wonderful. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Juliette. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Andrea.
We're going to please come and take a Corita poster from the Corita Art Center, free for all of you right here. And Andrea's book is also downstairs at the DelMonico booth, 20% off, free shipping. So come on down and see us. Thank you.